all here tonight on this rainy day. So welcome to tonight's ICS Faculty Fellowship Lecture titled Server Farming, Community Sustainability and Infrastructures of the Machine Learning Aid, presented by Dr. Clayton. I am Valeria Grimberg-Pla, Professora de Español and Director of the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society at BGSU. Part of the mission of ICS is to engage the BGSU campus and surrounding communities in conversations about important issues in our community and society, and what better place to do so than our local public libraries. Public libraries are vital to our communities because they provide free, equitable access to knowledge to all and offer a safe, welcoming space for everyone. Indeed, by ensuring open access to information and fostering informed dialogue, public libraries strengthen the foundations of our democracy. In turn, our faculty fellowship program features speakers helping us understand and transform the institutions that structure our lives. Today's program is no exception, as it examines how the resource-intensive growth of AI infrastructure affects sustainability and labor. This talk is in fact an invitation to critical inquiry and dialogue about the ways we are affected by and can navigate the challenges and implications of this rapidly growing technology. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp and the Lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations, present and past, who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize this historical and contemporary ties in our efforts toward decolonizing history, and we thank the indigenous individuals and communities who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial. The acknowledgement of land, labor, and systemic racism included here is a way to show respect to indigenous communities, but it is meaningless without action. As you navigate the world around you, we ask you to recognize and address inequitable practices in your organizations and communities. This includes stereotyping, no to little representation for indigenous, Latinx, and Black communities, queer people, and people within disabled communities, as well as inequities in education, housing, health, law, and commerce. Accordingly, I also want to recognize the often invisible labor of the people who have prepared this space, who will clean it after we leave, and those who work to maintain it. Big thanks to the Wood County District Public Library for allowing us to use their space tonight. Our special thanks go to Crystal Wetzel and Greg Laderal for the support and all the effort they put into hosting us tonight. Lastly, please join me in thanking Phoenix Ellison, Rodalyn Ode, Nilufer Eiler, Jabari Tweety, and Marisa Montgomery, both Marisa and Jabari here tonight. Thank you. They are the ICS staff who worked very hard to prepare for this event. Today, it is my honor to introduce one of our Fall 2025 ICS faculty fellows, Dr. Clayton Rosati. Clayton, a geographer by training, is an associate professor in the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University. Some of his recent publications include a collaborative article on data plantation, Northern Virginia, and the territorialization of digital civilization in the internet capital of the world, and that was published in 2023. And also Infrastructures of Obscenity, Total Request Live and Participatory Reproduction in Action, published in Cultural Geography. In his current research project about server farming, Dr. Rosati connects his ongoing research on communities in Northern Virginia, the internet capital of the world, to new research within Northwest Ohio. With this, his goal is to create a community playbook for increasing effective democratic participation in the production of AI technologies and their geographies of infrastructures, resources, and labor. As we all know, the growing machine learning or AI economy relies on an extensive geography of server farms, such as the metadata center that is currently being built not too far away from here in the Middleton Township of Wood County near Dixie Highway. Such server farms consume high amounts of electricity, water, and land, and have special impacts on organized and unorganized labor. So, just some quick announcements. If you would like to be added to the ICS email list to learn more about our events like this, please add your name to the list that's on the table at the back. If you are not already doing so, please follow us on social media and listen to the Big Ideas podcast. Just last week, we released an episode with our very own Clayton, Rosati, and his student Claire Cromley about media, place, and power, looking at America through James Baldwin. So, if you want to hear more, Big Ideas podcast. And for now, please welcome Dr. Clayton Rosati.
Wow, thank you, Valeria, and thank you to all of you for being here. This is a big group, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about this issue. I also want to say thanks to the ICS and to their student workers who have been really patient with me this semester, requesting all sorts of things that I ignored for far too long. So anyway, thank you, and I also want to thank the Wood County Library. So I picked a huge, I selected a huge name for this, a huge title for this talk. And so I have a huge talk that hopefully I can get through most of. But I'm hoping that I can cover the big bases that will allow us to have a good conversation afterwards. So that's my plan. If you can't hear me, please raise your hand or pull on your ears or do whatever you need to do, if I can see that far at this point. And if something is askew or whatever, feel free to stop me. I'm happy to fix whatever it is. I'm gonna go a little fast, so I'm sorry about that, largely because I just tried to jam too much in here, and it's still not enough, but that's whatever. So if you want me to slow down, I can do that too. We'll have a different pat on your head or something to slow down. I've been studying data centers for almost 25 years. Oops, I'm hitting the wrong buttons. I took this picture on the right with my dad driving around the backwoods of Northern Virginia and in his hand-me-down Buick or something, I think. And it seemed like an oddity back then, data centers. Today, at least I can't turn on my Google feed without seeing, most of the articles being about data centers, although that might be something about my algorithm. But there is, I think, something of a time that's come for the day of internet infrastructure or of media infrastructure and of the physical environments that make the kind of digital worlds and media worlds that we live in work. And to that end, I kind of want to say a little bit of a warning about thinking about data centers as I embark on this talk about data centers, which is that server farms, and I said this, it was published in the press, server farms don't just store data, they shape the geographies of our lives, and I hope that we can find some sort of way to talk about the issues that shape our lives together in spite of the really confounding politics that we seem to be living in. The punchline of this talk give it to you first, just in case we don't make it any further, is the data centers, I think, are just one piece of a much bigger problem. That data centers are a viewfinder for us, in a sense, into a bigger problem, or a set of bigger problems in our society. And we need to be able to see the forest and the trees in order to be able to rise to the challenges that they present to us. Here's a bit of a roadmap. I'm going to talk to you about how geography and media, or geography and AI, fit together. I'm going to talk a little bit about what server farms are. I'll talk a bit about Northern Virginia, or NOVA, and some of my research there. And I'll talk about the world beyond Northern Virginia, and the things that we can, share with Northern Virginia now that server farms seem to be everywhere. So, what is AI? Maybe this is too basic, but this is a talk at a library, and I thought I need to do some definitions. You won't find a definition of sustainability, though. I'm sorry about that. We'll talk about it later. Artificial intelligence refers to a model created to solve a specific problem or provide a particular service. The term artificial general intelligence refers to software that's capable of learning any task or subject. AGI does not exist yet, and it may never exist. And this was said by Bill Gates at the World Economic Forum in 2023. And I think it gives us a nice little capsule to understand the term. Here is a statement from IBM. I think it's a white paper or a blog post from IBM about machine learning. Machine learning is the subset of artificial intelligence focused on algorithms that can learn the patterns of training data and subsequently make accurate inferences about new data. This pattern recognition ability enables machine learning models to make decisions or predictions without explicit hard-coded instructions. Now, I will say that there are a lot of people who argue that AI is a con, that it doesn't do any of the things that they say it will do or should do, and it's largely just branding. And I think that it's a big world for debate about that. So I won't have a view on that right now. But I am interested in what it is that AI has, if we can use that term, has created for us. What is the world or this moment that we're living in vis-a-vis AI? And I'm just going to run through a bunch of questions here that I have as I'm thinking about what AI is, with pictures that are basically screen captures from my phone and other people's phones and my desktop and whatever. And I'm not going to talk about them, because if I do, we won't have any time at all. But I can come back to them at the end if you want to talk about any single one of them. We can do that. So what I want us to think about is, where is this moment that we've come to vis-a-vis artificial intelligence? And usually we think about that in terms of images or digital services or what have you. What are the values of this age? What are its effects? What kind of people is it making us? Oops. Sorry. Or more importantly, what kind of people are we making us? Because so much of what AI is us, is our inputs, our sloughed off behavioral data, our patterns of thought and search terms and things like that. Oops, sorry. And it's because of that kind of process by which AI gets trained that a lot of people suggest that AI is an extractive industry, that it exists only because it can extract its raw materials from us as we're searching for things or watching things or sending emails or recording things or sending stuff over the internet or whatever. And again, I think this is an important perspective. Where is it that the value comes from that drives this billion-dollar construction of infrastructure around the world, or billions of dollar investment. How does it affect work and life for ordinary people? We've heard a lot about the K-shaped economy, but in a lot of ways, the K-shaped economy is really old. Here's a graph of that starts in the 1970s showing that productivity has doubled for workers since '75, but their share of, it's complicated, their share of the income going to the bottom 90% has declined considerably. So basically the bottom 90% has gotten poorer as their productivity has doubled. And so there's a kind of long-term K-shaped economy that maybe we haven't been talking about for a long time and should be. And this raises the question, what are the old things, perhaps, that this new economy is built on? What are the old patterns that we haven't solved yet, that we need to keep thinking about and figure out how to think about together, because they now sit in more conspicuous ways in our lives. Okay, so what is a geographer's approach to AI and the machine learning age, whatever that is? And I'm a weird geographer because I study media. That's a really pretty niche topic among geographers, even still. Although I think every geographer should be studying media now. But I'll tell you a little bit about what I do vis-a-vis geography, and but don't hold it against all geographers, please. So what do geographers do? I'm going to suggest that geographers look, at least for my purposes tonight, look at three things. They look at interconnections. They look at how the stuff that we enjoy in one place is connected to all sorts of processes that happen all sorts of other places. And so there's a very famous trend in economic geography called follow the thing, or studying commodity chains and what have you. But the point is that we live in this global economic urban system, and I'll get back to the urban part later. But I think interconnection is something that we understand. Is something that we understand pretty well in Northwest Ohio, because we understand how processes in farming and beef cultivation and animal feeding lead to algal blooms in another part of our region. And this is something that BGSU has invested in terms of its watersheds project and other things. 2, geographers study landscape, which is this view that ideas don't just float around out there, that it's that we struggle over ideas about the world through how we stage and what we hide with the built environment. So the built environment is incredibly important to how we think. That's another piece of it. And 3, in that sense, we are our geographies. We build ourselves through the global processes. Oh, sorry. No wonder that you guys were looking at me. Yeah. So yeah, we stage and build our ideas through the built environment, and that means sometimes hiding the labor that it takes to build those ideal scenes that we see in our institutions and universities even. Okay, 3, we are our geographies. We build ourselves through the global process of digesting nature, which some geographers call urbanization. And with that should come, in that sense, a right to change ourselves by changing the city. We should have a right to the city. So if we are, for instance, our infrastructure, if we are the products of our infrastructure, then we should have the right to control and change those things that build us and make us what we are. The kind of gist of this, I think, is that all social processes take place somewhere, And the questions are how, why, who benefits, who pays, how are we changed, and so forth. And AI culture takes place through server farms. And they're called, I'm calling them server farms because that's what they started calling them in Virginia in the late 90s, because they started cropping up on, or sprouting up on old agricultural land. So what is a server farm, and who cares? According to Amazon Web Services, well, first, server farms are essentially data centers. Same thing, it's just funnier with server farm. So what is a data center? A data center is the physical location that stores computing machines. And I'll just sort of leave it there so that I don't take too much more time with this. But I want us to think about data centers, again, as this part of this interconnected global system. And not just because data centers are connected to all of these underground or underwater cables that span the entire globe, although that's important, but also because the very machines themselves are connected to all of these urban processes or urbanized processes of collecting resources and converting them into heat sinks or server boards or semiconductors and so forth. And this infographic from the USGS is just amazing, so if anyone wants it, let me know, I'll give it to you. And of course, this means that they're of geopolitical importance. We find ourselves fighting over that whole urban system that produces microprocessors, data centers, and so on. Data centers also require a ton of energy to do their thing. So the USGS says that between 2014 and 2024, data center load growth tripled. By 2028, data centers could consume 12% of the US's electricity. So data centers take a lot of power, one thing. And we can look at some graphs from a study done by MIT that really is digesting a study from Berkeley labs. And it shows just how much, especially the large co-location facilities, which are the AI facilities, are using in terms of electricity. An important thing I think that maybe everyone is interested in is that this has really a pretty big fossil fuel or carbon footprint. That fossil fuels, including natural gas and coal, make up just under 60% of the US electricity supply. Nuclear accounts for about 20%, and then renewables and what have you for the remaining 20%. Natural gas accounts for more than half of the electricity generated in Virginia, which has more data centers than any other state. And we can imagine that probably won't change anytime soon, in part because we don't have the capacity for, especially in Virginia, for renewables, and the nuclear option won't be possible for at least a few years, and some suggest maybe even decades, depending on how that unfolds. But you can see that there's this huge prediction of increased electricity use by data centers in the next really 3 years. Somewhere between a 6% to 12% increase. Depending on who you read, data centers in the US, and this is from MIT's Technology Review, data centers in the US use somewhere between 200 terawatt hours of electricity in 2024, roughly what it takes to power Thailand. That's just in the US, they don't only exist in the US. And I kind of like this illustration, although I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. The new CogX model uses more than 30 times more energy on each 5-second video than August's version did of the same application. 30 times more energy. And that is about 3.4 million joules more than 700 times the energy required to generate a high quality image. And this is the equivalent, at least according to MIT Technology Review, this is the equivalent to riding 38 miles on an e-bike or running a microwave for an hour. I thought that was a useful way of thinking about it. You could be running your microwave for an hour or generating something like a 5-second video. Use the same amount of energy. Data centers use a ton of water because they produce a lot of heat and they have to be cooled down. How much water? Well, really nobody knows. I mean, I think there are a lot of estimates, but there are a number of reasons why it's really difficult to make a really firm estimate of this. And the reason is that there's a bunch of different kinds of cooling systems. Some use more water than others. Some are closed loop and use antifreeze, which is fine unless the antifreeze leaks into the leaks. But also the data center companies are really not forthcoming with information about how much water they use, and so it's difficult to find data on that. And as a result, that means that the water issue is kind of complicated. There's a lot of controversy about it, and part of that is because of the transparency issues. So the AI world that we live in has a set of backends or infrastructures that exist in various places, and one of the most important places, because it has some of the most intense computing power there, or concentration there, is Northern Virginia. And there's been all sorts of segments done in the news about Northern Virginia. And so right now I'd like to talk a little bit about Northern Virginia, the so-called internet capital of the world. They gave themselves that name, by the way. Maybe you would imagine. They also used to claim that 70% of the world's internet traffic flowed through Northern Virginia, which it's not clear that was ever true. But someone has fact-checked that recently, and apparently it's much less. But whatever, they have the most capacity, really, of any place in the world as far as data centers are concerned. And there's a couple of reasons for that, which I'll talk about a little bit. But one of them is because an internet exchange, a really important one on the East Coast, was built in Tyson's Corner in the 90s. And that created a kind of infrastructural inertia that made it feasible for companies like AOL and other companies to build and construct facilities in Northern Virginia. There was a lot of access to internet backbone essentially there. And so the infrastructure made a difference for why they would settle there in the first place. And these are all the companies that Virginia likes to brag about. That Virginia likes to brag about having in its state borders. It doesn't put on these all of the defense contractors, which we'll talk about later, but Raytheon should be up there, and all of the other defense contractors you might think of. This is a map that I pulled from the datacentermap.com website, which is pretty useful, actually. There's another one that was created by Business Insider using a different method, but it's older. So this shows some of the concentrations of data centers. It doesn't account for all of them, though, because there's a lot of secrecy. So it shows some of the concentrations of data centers in Northern Virginia. And this is sort of northwestern Virginia. One thing that I thought I could do, I'm not a sophisticated map-making person, but I can make a transparency on PowerPoint. And I thought you could see a little bit here that there are kind of 3 counties that hold a really big bulk of the data center capacity in Northern Virginia, and that's largely because of the incentives that they gave to those companies to build there. Another thing you can see is that they like to cluster around roads, big transportation arteries, and that would also include airports, which I think makes BG interesting. All right, what I thought I would do is show you a little bit of how the landscape of Northern Virginia changed from 1984 to 2020. I'm gonna blow through this though, because I'm running out of time. So I'm just gonna go fast. You'll see some changes. There's nothing scientific about what I'm showing you. But I do want you to sort of notice that things go from being much greener to being whiter, which means that you start seeing more data center roofs, especially around Dulles Airport. And so I'll just kind of run through this. It's important to note that the fast tracking of permits and tax incentives made a really big difference in this development for nearly 30 years. And then by 2020, you start seeing a shift where people are kind of getting really miffed about all the data centers that they're seeing. And this, you know, for me, when I first started studying the data centers in Northern Virginia, they were buried in the woods somewhere. And by 2020, they're literally right in front of you everywhere along every road that you drive on in Virginia. And so I think people had to confront the issue of data centers in a more, more overt way as a result. Here's again an overlay of the data center collections or clusters around Dulles Airport. And the airport gets interesting for a number of reasons, but I'm gonna keep rolling here. So you start to see a fight over Northern Virginia's kind of bucolic landscape. There are a lot of conservationists who say, oh my God, we have this beautiful land and we're gonna lose it because of the data centers. They said a similar thing about a Disney theme park, which is another story. Like just 3 years before they started really courting data centers. But you know, there's something interesting, I think, about the luxury of a bucolic landscape for some people, but at the same time, I think it's an incredibly important issue because aesthetics are also about quality of life. The rich shouldn't just benefit from having a nice thing to look at outside, and I think it's important to preserve beautiful things, so at least sometimes. And so the question that I started wondering when I started seeing all of these resistance movements forming is, can these people go from being NIMBYs or people who just want to keep their own neighborhood beautiful to thinking about a kind of right to the city, or thinking about a kind of collective expression of how they and other people deserve to share in the ability to control that urbanization and the urban processes that construct them and their land, and the media age that we live in. And so I'll just sort of run through this more quickly. You can see that these movements tackled a large set of issues about zoning rules, about power line, the new power line placement, and about water usage. And I think, again, this forces us to think about, or should force us to think about, hopefully, not just whether we want a data center in our backyard, but what kind of city we want for what kind of society we want. There are some lesser told stories too about the problems with data centers. One is noise pollution. They're incredibly loud, especially because they have these backup generators that are often running, that are usually running. And so living around a data center can be really noisy. But also they bury history, as do a lot of other things. So this is an issue that I think is worth talking about more broadly. But one of the things that we might start the conversation with is, where did the land for Dulles Airport come from? And Dulles Airport came from a town that was a mixed race town. It had a black school and a white school, but it had a lot of black residents, and it was basically dispossessed by the federal government. It was called Willard, to produce Dulles Airport. So here you can kind of see the layout of the town juxtaposed on top of the layout of Dulles Airport. That's the gray. Another dimension of this is how much pre-Civil War history and post-Civil War history is in this area. And so here, this is basically the basis of my data plantations article, or my co-authored data plantations article. Here you have two Google data centers right across the street from a historic slave quarters. Just right across the street. And so the question is, what else are they built on top of? What else may be buried underneath the data centers? And this is something that is very interesting to me, in part because it takes the story beyond just simply resources to thinking about the broader questions of our social values and our history and who we are. So this is a map from Virginia's from a set of oral histories about the Underground Railroad in Northern Virginia. And so we can start laying over the data centers on top of that and thinking about all of the history of the Underground Railroad that maybe is buried underneath all of this development that no one ever thought about in Northern Virginia for all sorts of reasons. And again, you know, my goal here is to have us think about what kind of city for what kind of society, what are our values, etc. Of course, the data centers can be pretty ruthless with how they use land. They've disturbed a number of cemeteries in their construction, and part of that is because they just ignored the requirement that they should report if they're going to build near a cemetery. They're required to self-regulate on that, which is a ridiculous rule. But I think it's important for us to notice that on one hand we have this complete disregard of black history and maybe a lot of other history in Northern Virginia. And we also have Northern Virginia being one of the centers of the culture wars around education, around teaching black history and so-called critical race theory, which was a big campaign issue for Virginia's current, although exiting governor. So I guess I wonder what kinds of organizing can we start doing when we think about the political times that we live in, and how does the internet age, or the AI age, contribute to that polarization? Okay. Yeah, so I think it forces us to think, or it forces me to think at least a little bit about what we care about and who maybe we think our allies should be. And so Virginians organized around a whole variety of different issues, around transmission lines, around zoning, and around energy and so forth. And the struggle goes beyond Virginia, of course. This is a broader regional map of data center distribution. You can see Columbus has a lot. I think this is our little one here in BG. It's either that one or that one. There are a few that are being built right now, or at least in the preparation to be built in Michigan, which I'll cover, however, briefly. But I thought maybe this would just give you a little bit of a sense of that distribution in our neck of the woods. And some of this, I think, is because data centers have reached a kind of saturation point in Northern Virginia. And so they've started spreading further south and west. And I think they started also moving into other parts of the country. There are some things I think that make Northern Virginia special. One of those is government contracts. And so data centers themselves didn't build the wealth in Northern Virginia. And I think this is a really important point that a lot of people miss. The government contracts, Virginia gets the highest rate of government contracts of any state in the country. And so you can see Virginia gets $120.6 billion per person in government contracts versus Texas, which is the next biggest, which only gets $82 billion per person in government contracts. And so a lot of people look at Northern Virginia as an exemplar of development through data centers, but I think there's a lot more happening in Northern Virginia than just data centers, and we don't talk about that very much. There's more statistics on this. I won't show it to you, or I won't describe it, except to say that with the government shutdown and layoffs from the federal government, the unemployment rate in Virginia has risen, which maybe tells you a little something about, again, about the whatever. So Ohio is building now Bowling Green is now building a 600-acre data center. They were offered, Meta was offered tax abatements to build it. And this is a kind of common story in the construction of data centers. And there has been, of course, a struggle over who is going to pay the electrical bills. And not just in terms of their electrical use, because they haven't been built yet, some of them, but one of the main costs of electricity, or one of the main reasons that electrical costs rise is because the preparation for data centers requires a huge layout of infrastructure from the electrical companies. And who pays for that layout but, us. And so this is a big struggle, which Ohio is engaged in fighting. In Bowling Green, I have this question that I'm not sure I'm not sure how to answer it, but I thought I would pose it to you all just to think about it because it's very local, which is that Bowling Green has this very weird relationship to a coal plant in Illinois. We have this obligation to use coal power from this Illinois plant that we agreed to a long time ago. This article here is from 2007. That one's from 2024. But of the utilities used by the data center in BG, how much of it is linked to this kind of contracted coal plant obligation that BG has in Illinois? I don't know. This is a work in progress. It looks like we've thought through all of the things. BG has the water supply, of course, and hopefully it has the electricity, capacity to do it all. But I kind of wonder what other issues might be facing us than just whether the resources are there or not. And I think perhaps having a state or governmental structure to protect us and to provide transparency is really important in that process. It's important to note that that one Michigan township was sued because it denied a zoning request by a data center, like really recently this year. So these are, again, speaking of local protections, I think what we're looking at in a lot of ways is a real struggle for land, and we need to, I think about what that means in realistic terms. Okay, let's think a little bit about work. I have some questions that are lingering, and I'm going to try and finish in like 1 minute. One of those questions is, how is it that organized labor, which often, at least in Virginia, is used to build the data centers, how do they confront building coalitions, or maybe not think about building coalitions with those people trying to address the problems with data centers? So how do we deal with this kind of conflict of interest between organized labor and maybe environmental activism? It's a kind of tragic but familiar story for us maybe. There are moderators that do a lot of human work on AI and our platform economies. Of course, Starbucks and Amazon workers are unionizing right now. And New York has started turning to more unscripted television because if you just can't make money anymore doing writing scripts or paying people to write scripts and so on. All right, the last point on this that I want to make is that, again, the data centers are the trees. I can just sort of misuse this, this metaphor again. Data centers are the trees in a forest of the same problem, which is to say that we've been struggling with land use in Northwest Ohio for a long time because of agricultural runoff, because of nuclear waste, because of oil wells that have not been plugged correctly. And so what is it that makes data centers different for us than just a long history of misused land? And maybe that long history is what we can think about to help us think about why data centers matter right now. Not just the fact that they're going to use a lot of water, because we're already using a lot of water, or losing a lot of water because of oil pollution and so on. So what I want to suggest is that we think about data centers, again, as a kind of piece of a much bigger problem that has to do with how we create ourselves and what kind of world we're building, and who controls the building of that world. So what now? All right, very quickly, organize. Middleton organized. They blocked the construction of a new data center. I think that's really significant. National groups are organizing and have called for a moratorium on all new data centers, like Food and Water Watch, a group that I'm working with. There are all sorts of odd allies, for instance, like the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions and the Brewers for Clean Water. I think there's all sorts of ways that we can imagine building coalitions that maybe we didn't imagine, or that our algorithms didn't imagine. And perhaps some way that maybe Food and Water Watch can find common ground with the Local 26 of the IDW. And I think that's the end. I'd like to know what you think. Thank you. I know that was long. Thank you for sitting through that. So part of the point of discussion, I'm happy to show you more things or talk to you about whatever, tell you stories about taking pictures of data centers, whatever you might be interested in.
So before the program began, I mentioned that WGTE is hosting a town hall on the use of resources by data centers, and you said this has nothing to do with that.
I mean officially, like there's
no
no official connection.
No
between
official connection, okay, because it does seem like it has something to do with that.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
they're absolutely conceptually linked. Yeah.
That's what they
I know that we had, as a county, had decommissioned the wind tunnels quite a couple of years ago, as far as them being active in terms of our energy process. So, since we have this commitment to this coal situation that's going on in Illinois, was that part of the rationale?
That's a good question. I think that's complicated, and I don't have any information to speak on this except for what I've learned about other similar situations, which is that.
Reason I ask is because the rest of the world outside of the United States kind of uses like 20% wind energy, and we were just getting up to 3% of our energy totality.
Yeah.
And so for that to be decommissioned to bring in another energy source that is not renewable, to have this happen.
Yeah, I think what probably happened is that the wind turbines got old and they age relatively quickly and are expensive to replace, and the coal just outlasted them. I think that's probably the sad situation. There could be something more nefarious happening, which I'd love to hear about. But I think in terms of the general pattern, it's a really important point that you're making, which is that we're falling behind on renewables and falling behind trying to figure out how to use renewables for this big power grid push that we're looking at. And we're basically shoveling money into the furnace again with coal, which has a carbon footprint that we know about and effects that we know about. It's an important question, which I don't have the answer.
It's okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk, Clayton. It was so interesting, so many things. I have a couple questions, and I think they're about land use. I have a lot of thoughts percolating about environmental use that I'm not even ready for, and hopefully somebody else will have those questions. But the questions about land use, it just reminds me of kind of the tax incentives for the auto industry, for example, right? And so part of me is wondering, in places like Detroit, Toledo, where there's a lot of spaces that used to be factories, right? If these could be then repurposed to a data center, or do they need brand new land? Or is it just easier to build brand new? I was also thinking about the old suburban malls, which nobody knows what to do with, but maybe that's our future. And then my second kind of question comment is that if there is indeed a moratorium on data centers in kind of local geographies, I'm assuming that they'll just go elsewhere, right? Because it's not like people will stop using the internet, will stop needing the data. So in terms of kind of geographies, how close do these centers need to be to where the people are using the data? Or is this something that's gonna happen, like this is gonna become somebody else's problem in a country elsewhere that has different zoning?
I think that they have to be. I don't look, so I'll answer the second one, and I'll dodge both questions.
Yeah.
But
Feel free.
I'll dodge the first one
Love
first.
you, love
Yeah. So I think there is an importance of proximity. Like there is some of that, but there is also like national security issues and other kinds of like weird tax things and stuff that do make a kind of necessary case for having them in certain countries at certain times at least, and that's why they haven't gone to wherever and just left here. But I think you're right. This question about a moratorium is interesting. If it's only in one location, then yeah, you're just saying, well, go to Michigan if you're in Ohio or whatever. It's the same with the gambling economy or whatever. Right, exactly. Whatever economy, you're right. Yeah, everything spreads, and so the Food and Water Watch moratorium call for a moratorium is national, which kind of settles that issue. But I don't know. I don't think it'll have. I'm not sure. I think it's symbolic. I really applaud them for doing it. And I think, given their platform and the other important things they've accomplished, it's like the logical next step. But yeah, you look at how hungry some of the towns are for revenue, and it's a hard thing to turn away. On the other thing, I don't know why they don't use shopping malls. They used to use abandoned buildings in cities before cities became expensive, and so it might just be easier now. In fact, I'll say this: one of the threats I think to organized labor on this is that the construction companies are starting to figure out ways to make modular data centers, so that you don't need all of the skilled work to produce them. So, to some extent, they're kind of like trying to get the last gallon of oil out of the ground. It's like, if I can use that, I don't know, too many metaphors today, but I think they're just sort of pulling on a thread that's gonna unwind soon. Yeah.
Dr. Rosati, thank you for this
Sorry,
great
go ahead.
talk. Sorry, I didn't know if there's somebody behind me. So I'm trying to understand a little bit more about local politics, and I know that that's not necessarily your area, but when the Amazon distribution center went up in Rossford, I call it Rossford Perrysburg because it's right, everybody was flipping out because, oh wow, Amazon has come here. And since then, that's the only benefit that I can really see for our community, is that we have bragging rights that a major corporation has just set up this building that's sort of draining everything and then causing a lot of traffic. So I'm trying to understand more what smaller towns gain from this, or when a corporation comes in, what is their pitch, or is there no pitch except we'll sue you if you don't let us set up?
Well, I think there's two things now. I mean, one is the lawsuit. I'd never seen that before. I mean, I hadn't been looking for it necessarily, but that was pretty new to me. I'm just looking for the tax incentive.
And I'll just add to that, Rossford, I think that it was a total tax abatement, and please correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in the room, but I don't think they're paying taxes at all or for a while, so.
No, this is, and this is a big critique in Virginia of the data centers that have been built there, is that like, hello, when are we gonna start seeing some of the revenue from these things? I think they benefit jobs briefly. There's, a big construction push on one of them that's over relatively soon.
Right.
And then maybe they employ 100 people, some of whom actually work there alone as security guards, and some of whom maybe travel between a bunch of different sites. So the job benefit is not great, except for temporarily, and that relies on building more and more and more. So that's partly why I worry about the politics of organized labor around this, that is tied so much to this, what might be unsustainable process. Amazon, on the other hand, at least for a while, had some really good paying jobs in their warehouses. Now they've cut, I forget what they cut their workforce by recently. Does anyone have the figure? Some
They
tens
just
of
recently
thousands,
14,000
I
jobs.
can't remember, how many?
Just recently 14,000 jobs.
Yeah, a lot of workers have just been cut by Amazon. They're talking about replacing half their workforce with robots. So, nothing is I don't know what to say about that, except that it's a good deal for a little while, I think, and that's that. Yeah.
I have a question, and I will admit, I went to law school because there was no math or science involved, so I'm not the best person to be studying this issue, but I've been looking at it for like 6 months. How much water this plant is going to use, what it's going to do to the people who live around with their wells, how much Bowling Green has invested when it comes to intake valves out of the Maumee, what's going to happen when we're in our second year of a drought. We'll probably have more next year. Again, not a science person, but that's what they say. And you could walk across the Maumee this year, which is where we get our water. And they're going to get part of their water for this meta place. Why is absolutely no one talking about what's going to happen to the water in Northwest Ohio? And I've asked people in government, I've asked city councilmen, I've asked county commissioners, and it's just nebulous because they don't want to be asked. They haven't thought about it. If the information is there, they don't want to tell us. I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means, by the way, but it's like operating in the dark. So can you tell me, how do you get information about all of this?
Yeah, I'd like to have a good answer to that too, but I think, your law school experience might be useful this way.
I'm not ready to ramp that up here.
Okay. Maybe you have some friends too that you can
Yeah.
rally together. I think the non-disclosure agreements that they make some towns sign, and I know for a fact that Meta made, or at least the real estate company made,
County commissioners.
residents sign non-disclosure agreements who were selling their properties to them. And so I think like the legal secrecy is an important part, and it doesn't need to be lizard people as a conspiracy. It's like there's some people who want to get a cheap price on some land, and so they'll do what they need to do. They'll use shell companies, which they frequently do, and they won't disclose how much water they're going to use. And until I think legally we hold their feet to the fire.
This is going to affect the drinking water of everyone in this room, though.
Yeah.
So why aren't we discussing it before the plant went up?
I think that's the right question. I think it's absolutely the right question. I don't think it's too late. I don't think it's too late, but I think it's the right question, and I think there's all sorts of issues there too. Like what happens if there's a glycol leak around all of that farmland? I don't have an answer to that, but I know that those leaks happen sometimes. That's antifreeze.
Have you found any kind of coalitions across state lines where folks wanting to come whether in Michigan or Virginia? And is there a mix of like community groups and nonprofits, or how's the resistance?
Yeah, there is currently. I think this is one of the reasons why Food and Water Watch is interesting, is that they're organizing around a bunch of different issues across state lines in Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, and Maryland. And some of that organizing has to do with relitigating or reorganizing around old pipelines that they thought that they had stopped being built, that now there's a new incentive to build them because there's all this new energy that's required in New York or Pennsylvania or through New York to Pennsylvania or whatever. So food and water watch is a really important one to pay attention to, and they have, I think they have a pretty big network and a really strong organizing process. And so they're interesting. I think also the Sierra Club in Virginia has been an interesting force there. And so, I think look at national organizations that would be interested in this. There's another one that I had a slide that I stole from their website, the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thank you, Rose. Yeah, Natural Resources Defense Council is another one that's operating kind of regionally here in the Midwest.
What is it about the AI data centers, or are there just so many more of them, that is causing that huge increase in electricity usage? We've had data centers for decades. What's happening now that all of a sudden it's increasing?
It's the necessary computing power to make a video of Martin Luther King Jr. as a professional wrestler that looks realistic and has camera angle changes and whatever. That kind of computing power is so much hotter, requires so much more electricity, is hotter because it requires so much more electricity. And so I think that's part of the answer. The data centers have definitely gotten bigger. Like this one here is way bigger than any of the early ones that I took pictures of in 2000 or 2001. So I think there's just a rising, what you might call demand, although I'm skeptical of what that word actually means right now, since we all get phones with AI built into them. We don't even, what is demand in that context? But yeah, I think it's a great question.
So you're saying 99% of these data, videos, or whatever, we don't need them at all? Because I sincerely don't need Martin Luther King.
Professional wrestling. You don't want to see Reagan fight Castro.
So it's all stuff that we don't need for the most part. Okay.
I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying,
No,
here's what
I'm old, my kids, now, is it a thing that young people take themselves off everything and start using their phone just as a phone?
I have a student who has a flip phone. Yeah, I have a student who has a flip phone.
Because I'm ready to do it if it helps.
I think, here's what I think, is that we're not dealing with all the costs that actually come with a cheap video. It's too cheap to make, and people pay for it in all these little ways, across a vast amount of space. And so, but one of the things that I think we should be organizing around is figuring out how to make those things commensurate, how to make a silly video commensurate with its costs to communities. And that might include what it does to our brains by watching it. I don't know, but yeah. Yes.
I'm with you on the flip phone thing. But here is where I'm looking at this. It seems like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, my father worked at Ford Motor Company in Brook Park for 35 years when I was growing up. And when they had built that plant, it brought a whole lot of other surrounding businesses with it. So when you hired 14,000 people to work in that plant, and then they closed the plant, then that's not only 14,000 jobs, but there's, where you have 20 tables at a restaurant, that's now down to 5. The dry cleaners, where you have 10 dry cleaners in a city, it's now down to 2. And I think we all remember when Walmart became something, a thing. They were a business that took 7 years of losses to make sure that they drowned out the jewelry stores, the hardware stores, and all these other industries that come with it. So when we take small towns like Bowling Green or Perrysburg or Maumee, when you put a huge product in that town, there's all these other little businesses, strip malls, everything else that comes with it. that creates a community. And then once that happened, I mean, we saw some of that with Cooper Automotive. I remember going to, when they lost 300 jobs there, when they closed that down, there was less seats at restaurants, there was less waiters. It's a domino effect for this happening. So the way they're pitching this, if I could be wrong, they're pitching this in the same way that they pitched these other industries that came to our town at one point in time that actually provided jobs and provided access to middle class or working class lifestyles, where all this is doing is draining, and we're still experiencing layoffs and still experiencing downsizing in our communities.
I think this is a really important point, and it's a hard one to think about because I think it's really easy. It's the kind of natural inclination of me, who grew up in a union family,
Yeah.
To kind of think backwards about this, like things were better back then.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those workers were pulling on a thread that was going to come to an end also.
Well, it came to an end in 1994
Yeah.
when,
if not sooner, but
well,
yeah.
when Bill and Hillary Clinton, they signed in NAFTA.
Yeah.
And it allowed plants to not collectively bargain any longer with their workers. So when the plant or workers decided to strike, they just closed the plant up and moved it to Mexico, where workers are working for $4 a day, or to India.
Ohio
So-
just did this with, Ohio just made it illegal for state college teachers to strike, but they also made Ohio a right to work state, so we can't force freeloaders or free riders to pay dues anymore. And so that was just recently. So I think in a lot of ways this has been a political consensus for the last 40 years or so.
Yeah.
Right? And shame on the politicians that said that they were for working people who supported these things. But I think in a lot of ways that world is over.
Yeah.
We can't go back there. And so what we might think about, and this is why I had this, this kind of abstract slogan that I kept saying, what kind of city for what kind of society? I think
Right.
maybe we should start thinking, well, how do we find other ways to meet our needs that connect with other places, that don't shut them out, but connect with other places, and maybe are more secure than kind of begging one company or another to build a plant here or this, that, or the other thing. Again, that's just as abstract as anything, but if we're going to organize around not having something, we might also think about organizing around having something. And that might be figuring out ways for workers to work across borders.
Or find a park during a work day, not a weekend, but a Monday or Tuesday, and we all sit down and just talk to each other.
Yeah.
And not attend work.
Okay.
Where that would show that we're not take our phones, not. I'm just saying that if you're gonna do that, do that in a way in which it's gonna be effective in a public medium where we all are paying our tax dollars into it. That's what Occupy Wall Street was about, and that got corporate America's attention to some degree, that somewhat the gig is up. But until that happens, it just seems like it's more of a land grab that's happening right now for this. You have farmers losing their farms, and the land grab happens, then they turn it over to this data mining.
They also get really rich. Some farmers get really rich,
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and then some people don't. And so I think it's a complicated process, but there's I think there's a lot of ground to find in common with across a bunch of different groups. So I really appreciate your thoughts on it. Other questions or comments?
So there's the argument that right now we're entering an AI bubble, and to explain what that means, we've started to reach the full capabilities of what generative artificial intelligence can do, but it's more so about we've over-invested in its potential so much that it's never going to reach. And so even though this is debated, I think it's becoming more and more of a possibility that there is going to be a point when, not if, these data centers become abandoned and are no longer in use and taking up our property for land that could be used for farming or contains our history. So what examples in history are there of these kinds of infrastructures being built and then abandoned that we can hopefully preemptively learn from?
I think, I mean, to answer the first part of that is like there's tons of examples of abandoned mines, plants, all sorts of infrastructure that that found its use and then became useless in some sense. But I am skeptical. I'm curious about the bubble issue. In part because I saw the bubble concern arise in Virginia around the housing crisis time. There was a lot of investment around that time in data centers, and so a lot of people said, "Oh, we're over capacity. Nobody is going to ever use this, and we're going to see this second bubble happen in basically internet infrastructure." But there's just always more videos to make, or more videos to save, or more whatever. I think there's a kind of I don't know if you saw that thing about, I don't expect you to have looked at every picture that I put up there, but there's this picture that I took from Instagram's marketing website, and it says that their marketing strategy is an infinite loop.
TikTok.
Yeah.
I remember this.
Oh, was it TikTok? Sorry, TikTok, thank you. Yeah. And so, participation creates more content, which creates more advertising opportunities, which creates more interest. I'm not sure that it's a bubble. I think it's propping up our economy right now. But I don't know for it to be a bubble.
The billionaires have been making some big financial moves, especially in the last week, is what I've been reading.
Oh, because they're worried about a bubble, like
That's a
dumping?
speculation, yeah.
Well, I'd be interested. I mean, and it's an important question. What happens to that? I mean, I remember visiting my uncle who lives in Sacramento during the housing crisis, and he was looking up, like just across the street from where he lives, there was farmland wherever, for as far as the eye could see, and they had all become housing tracts, which now had paved over all of this great farmland in Central California or whatever. And so I think it's possible to ruin a lot of things with all of the speculation and the dangers that come with capital being so mobile and us being so immobile in a lot of ways. And that's I don't have a good answer. I'm a little skeptical about the bubble, but it could be. I mean, why not?
Can we ask AI?
It'll cost you a 500 milliliter bottle of water.
Use as much as 12% of the electricity in the United States. Is there any estimation on how much they use of the fresh water consumption?
No. It varies from place to place. You'll find really shocking statistics in Arizona, of course, and there's a Stanford study that I didn't include, not because I didn't want to, but there's a Stanford study about what AI is doing to the West, especially. The water strain in the West is much higher than it is in other parts of the country. So I think it varies from region to region, but again, it's really difficult to know how much water. Just because one system uses or claims that it uses so much water, I think the company will say, well, that's just a one-time investment of that water. It's in a closed loop. It's cooled in these other ways, and so it doesn't evaporate. And so I think there are all sorts of answers, but we need some eyes on this issue, and we need some more transparency on it.
Any problems with fresh water in northern Virginia after all these data centers?
Yeah, well, there are concerns about that. I mean, and it's another hard thing to gauge. Like Virginia's been in a drought for a while, and and there's a bunch of different kinds of data centers there, and so some of them use more water than others. So it's hard to pin them down, and maybe that's another piece of the organizing puzzle: is how do you deal with the slipperiness of these these companies and their desire to avoid, you know, having some responsibility for the natural resources or the electricity or whatever. Ohio's been pretty good about trying to make data centers pay for their own usage and especially their own build-outs, but they're getting pushed back on it. So, you know, who has the bigger team of lawyers is always a question. But we have us also, you know, and I think organized people make a big difference.
Just a comment from last night's city council meeting that Jim Evans, who's a hydrologist, spoke about the concern that the Maumee River being so low that we all who live in Bowling Green are, there should be concern that we are getting scarce on our water, and that it could have been required of the data center that they have a water recovery system, but it wasn't. Because that sort of built, a water recovery system built into the data center would save about probably 80% of the water that's used.
Interesting. I'd have to look more at the details of what their cooling system is and what have you. But you know, again, I think data centers are important, but they're a part of a bigger problem that we're dealing with, or a bigger set of problems, and we should be organizing around that set of problems in a way that deals with all these trees.
I think one of the reasons that farmers are, and you know, government at large is so comfortable selling all this farmland to data centers or to other industries, but mostly data centers right now, is because we kind of overproduce a lot of the agricultural products, like soybeans or corn. In the recent past, you know, it's been like we export like over half of our soybeans to China or something. And so then like when the data centers come along, it's like easy to make that decision. We don't need this land anymore. And
Can I just
yeah.
interject? I think it's interesting to think about that, especially this year, since there's been this disruption of the soybean trade.
Oh yeah.
And
Like it would have made more sense for me to even say that last year. Now people are like, ah.
yeah.
But one of the things I think we should be thinking about is like if this land isn't going to be turned to agricultural production, or it's no longer viable as like agricultural productive land, we could restore a prairie on that land. We could dig it out and even restore some of the wetlands, and that would help with water filtration in the region. That would help, you know, migratory birds, and that would probably help maintain local water tables quite a lot. So it's worthwhile kind of like thinking about these other options too, I think. That was more of a comment.
That's great. That's great. That's important. That's part of the urban system. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, please.
So, one thing that I found interesting, and this is just a comment just from hearing, you often in your talk you kept using the term we, and so I was really happy because I kept wondering who is we. As a historian, we're always like we the people. It's like, well, who's the we and who's the people, right? And so you use that term a lot, and then you segue into what was happening at Dulles. And so we often need to think about when it comes to the people most impacted by this historically has been people of color, Native Americans, indigenous people. And now what we're seeing though, because those areas, those properties, that geography has been so contaminated, so unrehabilitatable. Now we're moving in, and expensive. Like these people are pushed out. Use the term for urbanization, and then you get gentrification and, just the displacement, talk about geography, of individuals from their land. But what we, as people who can have the benefit of looking back, we should know that anytime that happens to one group of people, inevitably it's going to happen to another group of people, right? And so basically what we're seeing now is we've used up these urban spaces because, as someone mentioned, what has happened, what is the history of, nuclear plants and building over nuclear plants? What is the history of, building on top of, disaster zones such as Lake Lanier? What is the history of building on top of grave sites? And we know that history, right? People have been fighting about that since the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it kind of does make sense now, especially if we look at the last couple of years, that you are going to move towards the Midwest. But it also makes sense for people who have been displaced or who have been sort of crunched by the US government, especially if you think about indigenous land out west. This might be a good idea. A water supply in the desert, jobs for even 10 years. Bowling Green, I mean, we just moved here 3 years ago. It has 3 elementary schools. Do we not understand what this is going to do in regards to the expansion of this town? And I'm not arguing for the expansion of this town, but the stores, as this gentleman mentioned. And so for a lot of people, short-term gain is worth the pain.
Yes, I mean, so there's a bunch of pieces here, but I think one piece is like, yeah, when I'm thinking about the we, I'm thinking about who this happens to, who the most vulnerable people are that this happens to, and how those things tend to then trickle to the rest of the country. But also, how the things that happen to those people are us, those are our siblings, our country people, they're our neighbors, those are people that I grew up with, that I went to school with, whatever. And so I think in some sense there's an importance of constructing we now, especially because AI is constantly segmenting us into all of these different yous or thems, and I think we have so much to talk about now, so much that we might have in common, that maybe that's some offline work we really need to do, actually, is think about a we that includes those people that we often don't include. There was a CBS, I think, piece about data centers in the Midwest, and it had all of these angry-looking, rural young men who were protesting data centers, and I think white rural young men, right? And I think what they might have in common with the Gaskins family, whose cemetery was disturbed by one of those data centers being constructed in Virginia. I mean, these things won't show up in the algorithm, but this is maybe the work of community organizing that we have to do offline. And I'm sorry, I've misplaced the other pieces of it, but I thought that was a really important part of your comment and thoughts, so I wanted to address it. Thank you. You guys have been so patient and really just lovely. Thank you for asking all these questions. I'm not sure I've ever been asked this many questions. And thanks for sitting through this and for being here on a cold night. I hope that maybe you got something out of it, and I'll talk to you. I'm happy to talk to you all about it more. So thanks so much again. Thanks to Oh, yeah, sorry.
We would appreciate it if you could leave your feedback. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Clayton.
You see me did with the black car?
But there's so many, like, I feel like